Hi, my name is Booki Vivat, and I'm the author of the Frazzled series, and you are watching So Booking Cool.
So booking, so booking, so booking cool.
There's so motherfucking cool to listen to So Booking Cool.
Welcome to So Booking Cool, it's Joel B. Today's guest is the author and illustrator of the New York Times best-selling graphic novel series, Frazzled, which includes Book 1, Everyday Disasters and Impending Doom, Book 2, Ordinary Mishaps and Inevitable Catastrophe, and Book 3, Minor Incidents and Absolute Uncertainties. Frazzled has garnered praise for its relatability, humor, and compassion from many, including NPR, Kirkus Reviews, Publishers Weekly, School Library Journal, and Bulletin of the Center for Children's Books, who says this about the protagonist. Abbie's wisecracks and observations, coupled with her remarkable gift for hyperbole, will keep readers laughing, while her challenges will have them relating. It's an amusing romp, perfect for those with their own concerns about the middles. Now fans are, and they can enjoy Abbie Wu and our guest's new webcomic series, Abbie Wu's Not-So-Epic Quarantine Diary. Here with us today, she is Booki Vivat. Stay tuned for our conversation only on So Booking Cool. Booki Vivat. So, when did your love for books begin?
Oh man, that's like taking it way, way back into the past. I think that, my name is Booki, so part of me feels like my love of books was like predestined in a way, just because I've like grown up, but like Booki was a nickname that I was given from birth and before I could even read. So I kind of feel like if I didn't read, what kind of like that doesn't fit at all. But I like grew up reading. My mom read to me when I was a kid. And I think that it's always just been like a pretty formative part of like who I am. And I don't know whether that was like because I was named Booki or who knows. But yeah, it's always been a like thing that I've like connected to is like stories and books and just like interesting characters.
What kind of stories in particular, and what made a character interesting for you?
So I think for me, the characters that are like maybe most interesting are the ones that are a little bit messy and don't quite have things figured out, which I guess you can kind of surmise from the fact that I wrote a whole book series with the title Frazzled. I think that the characters that I'm really drawn to are the ones that I see myself or a part of myself in. So there's like a lot of, for example, one of the like formative texts growing up that I read was Ella Enchanted. And in that book, Ella she's kind of, she's super stubborn. She is like really awesome, but in a way there's a lot of things that she has a temper. And I think that characters like that who are not perfect and who are maybe a little bit more realistic or relatable, I think that for me, those are the ones that feel most interesting to read about because you can really see how the things that they go through in the story really change them and how they grow as characters. So yeah, definitely any of those.
And was doodling something that you also enjoyed from when you were a child?
Yeah, so, I think that when it's interesting, the whole journey that people go through as artists. I think there are some people who, have drawn their whole lives and they like knew that they were going to be an artist, and everyone in their like classes knew they were going to be an artist because they were always drawing. And I was someone who drew a lot. Like my friends and I would draw little like stick figure comics to each other, and we would doodle all over our notebooks and stuff like that. But I think that I never kind of made the connection of oh, this is something that could translate into a career or it could translate into like I didn't think of it as art. I just thought of it as like drawing something silly, something kind of like that I was just doing for fun. And even like when I would take like art classes, I think that I was really discouraged by the fact that I just felt like I could never produce the kind of work that I wanted to. Like everything seemed not quite good enough. And so that was like very discouraging for me. So I think for a while, I really didn't consider myself an artist. I really didn't think about doodling as anything beyond just kind of expressing myself for fun. But turns out, I guess it is.
Yeah, and you know, you did mention career. So, Bookie, would you say that your background in publishing as well as working at a bookstore, would you say that that has played any role in your journey to becoming an author and an illustrator?
That's also a really hard question because I think that I think yes, ultimately yes, I think it did. But there's this period of time because when I was working in publishing, I worked on the publicity end of in the children's books division. So I got to like celebrate all these new books that were coming out. I would try and help get them promoted and help get them attention and just basically hyping up great kids books. But so as someone who is on like the very far end, the kind of tail end of the creative process, it's very different being on the complete opposite end now as a creator and to start with basically nothing in front of you and to have like look at these like blank pages or look at you know, like a blank Word document and try and come up with a story and come up with characters from that. And so there was a point in time when I was like at the very beginning of writing Frazzled where I would look at these books that I was working on in my publishing life and how finished they were and how polished they were and how great they were. And it was really hard to imagine what it looked like to create that because I was just at the very beginning. So in some ways it was really challenging to sort of balance those two things. But ultimately, once I got to that end part, once I had finished writing the book, I think I really benefited from having worked in those spaces because I knew kind of what was important, what I could do as a writer, what I could and couldn't control. And I think it did give me a lot of insight into the publishing process that I think a lot of authors don't have because publishing isn't always as transparent as it can be or should be. So writers sometimes feel like they don't know what's happening with their book or what's important or what they should focus on. And I think for me, having that kind of behind the scenes insight sort of helped me ground myself and understand what it was that was important for me and my book to feel successful and to feel appreciated. Yeah.
Did you share with anyone that you were going to be working on Frazzled? Anyone in publishing?
So actually, it's kind of funny. The way that I got the book deal and the way that I kind of Frazzled came to be is really unconventional. So for most authors, they have a story, they like write it, and then they sort of pitch this idea and share this idea with an agent, and then they get sold, and there's the whole like traditional process to it. For me, it happened in a really sort of strange way of so I was working in publishing and I really hadn't considered writing a book or anything like that. I had never written a book before. I thought I was just going to be on the tail end of things and just help get great books out there to like kids. But at the same time, we talked a little bit about how I have always been a doodler. And so I keep these planners and I actually have some here. So I keep these planners where I like draw out my weeks. And so I have kept these, and I just did them for fun. I started them a while ago, and this is like basically since 2013, and earlier. I have some that are earlier, but I don't have them with me. But so I've kept these planners, and I just drew in them for fun, like I was talking about, just straight doodling for myself. But then someone I worked with at the publishing company saw them, and like one thing led to another, and it got the attention of other people and an editor, and it kind of from there, this whole idea of me potentially writing a book, potentially creating a story around this kind of frazzled character in my planners, which is essentially a fictionalized version of me, like that kind of sprung up into this book series. So it came in a really strange way, and it was not something that I was expecting, and it was not something that I was prepared for, but it was something that was a really kind of wonderful set of circumstances that we kind of rolled with.
Wow, very interesting.
It was unexpected.
And, Frazzled is a book that does highlight, the middle school experience. And that's something that you've received a lot of praise for it being so relatable and, a compassionate portrayal and depiction that's also gentle about that experience of being a middle schooler. So are any of those experiences in the Frazzled series at all identical to any of your own middle school days or someone that you know?
Yeah, like the entire series. It's not exactly what happened to me in middle school, but there's so much stuff that it's just like mined from my middle school experiences. There are references to people that I grew up with. There are references to places that I had in my childhood, and so it's kind of interesting when someone who grew up with me reads the book, and I think they can like automatically tell what I'm referencing. I think that for me, I didn't necessarily set out to kind of rehash my middle school experience. Initially, the way that the idea for the series started was, and the editor was looking through kind of these planners, and I had drawn this really dramatic doodle that said, I live my life in a constant state of impending doom. And it was like a picture of the world kind of crushing me. And I drew that like as an adult because that's how I felt at the time. But she looked at it and she said, there's like, that's our girl. Like there's a story here. And so while the story of Frazzled is not exactly me in middle school, it's also not exactly me now. It's kind of this combination of these feelings that I think I started to feel when I was in middle school, of just feeling like everyone else knew what they were doing and I was lost and I was the only one, and just feeling very frazzled and very confused and not knowing who I was or where I belonged. And I think that when I tried to find an entry point into that character, I kind of naturally went into my past and looked into my middle school experience. And because it was such a formative time, I think that eventually what happened was my book ended up becoming kind of not exactly autobiographical, but not completely untrue sort of mashup of fiction and reality. Yeah, which is kind of the best way, because you can kind of manipulate things so you don't have to be too true to life, but at the same time you can draw from your experiences. And so I think that Frazzle really somewhere in the middle of those things.
And as a former teacher, did your profession involve encouraging students to read?
Yeah, so, well, when I was a teacher, I was actually a middle school teacher in Korea, in South Korea. And so I was an English teacher. So I taught a range of students from 6th through 8th, and they were also at varying levels of English. So it wasn't so much like a traditional teaching role. And while I think that I also had so many students, and my role was mostly just kind of getting them to feel more comfortable speaking English. And but there was like a group of girls who would come in to clean the classroom all the time, and we would actually have really interesting conversations about books that they had read that had somehow made it over to, that were like popular in Korea as well as in America. And it was interesting to kind of connect with them over those stories, and also just to connect with them about life in general. I think that my experience as a teacher, more rather than me influencing them, I feel like they influenced me, because I really got to see how the middle school experience and this sort of like adolescent experience kind of transcends like any boundaries. I think that they were expressing really similar feelings that I remember feeling when I was in middle school, that I felt very connected to them in that way. So I feel, yeah, I mean, I would love to say that I really made an impact on them and got them to read, but really I think they had more impact on me.
And I'm just saying, that's what the best teachers usually say. They say things like what you just said.
That's good. Hopefully they thought I was a good teacher.
Yeah, I'm sure they did. During the quarantine and pandemic, Bookie, I understand that you felt unfocused, you felt overwhelmed, and that kind of paved the way into the creation of Abbie Wu's Quarantine Diary. So can you tell us more about this and what led to it and why you were initially feeling those emotions?
Yeah, so, I mean, it's a pandemic. It's like a very, very confusing and new time for everybody. And I think leading up to that, I had already been in kind of a creative struggle of trying to figure out what was next for me, because I had basically finished all the Frazzled books. Frazzled was done, it was over. And I think part of me was mourning that a little bit of knowing that kind of I had to let these characters go. And so when the pandemic when everything happened, I felt like everyone else, all of a sudden I couldn't focus. And all I could think of was what was happening around me, worrying about people in my life. I live in Brooklyn by myself, and my family is from California. So they're all either in California or in Thailand. And so I was basically separated from everyone, and including my friends, and all I could do was just sit in my own head. And that is never a great place for creativity. I think there's some extent where you're in your head, but then you kind of have to get out those feelings. And for me, I felt like I was just sitting in these worries and these fears and this confusion, and not really knowing what to do with it. And what I realized in retrospect now is when I look at the Frazzled books, I really realize how, even though this is a story about Abbie in her middle school context, a lot of the emotions that she feels and a lot of the things she struggles with are actually things that I was struggling with in my adult life as a writer, as a creative. And I often channeled those feelings into the book. Like the first book is really about her trying to figure out, like feeling like she doesn't have a thing. And that's exactly how I felt. The second book is so much about her coming into new experiences, meeting new people, and trying to navigate what that looks like. And that was something that I was dealing with as an author. And so when I realized that I kind of used these books as my little creative therapy sessions, I figured, why can't I do that with the pandemic? Why can't I do that with this quarantine? Why can't I channel these emotions and give myself a little distance from them by kind of processing them through Abbie's eyes? And so even though the book series is over, I figured I might as well just create like a little webcomic for anyone who wants to follow along. That way it'll be really cathartic for me, and it'll give me a chance to process what's happening without having to feel so close to it. And I think that has been the most fun thing about writing these quarantine diaries, is just giving myself a little bit of space and I guess finding a new way of looking at what's happening through another person's lens that is still slightly my own, because Abbie really is a sort of fictional alter ego for me. And but there's a lot of benefits to putting your fictional alter ego into different scenarios, because it's it's close, but it's not too close. And so yeah, I think that it's been a kind of fun way of dealing with the pandemic, and then people get to read along as well.
Do you see yourself ever channeling any of your emotions and something of an alter ego into maybe YA or adult books at all?
Yeah, I think that I probably wouldn't do an adult book, just because I don't really feel like an adult, and I think that it's a totally different world on the adult side of things, and I'm not sure that I would go in that direction, but definitely something YA or related, I think, would be more in my wheelhouse, just because high school is also a very confusing time. So any sort of growth of character and trying to figure out who you are and navigating these worlds, I think that those kind of situations are really interesting to me, and those are the periods of time that I really like to explore. I think also a lot of what I'm realizing is a lot of the problems that you kind of come across as an adult that you are still wrestling through, I think a lot of them kind of originate and stem from childhood. I think these questions of like that Abbie is dealing with, who am I, where do I belong, what is my thing? Those are really formative questions that maybe kids start to think about when they're in middle school, but I still feel like I'm trying to answer those questions now as an adult. And I think that it's just more interesting to explore, for me at least, to explore those questions like through a middle school lens or through a like young adult lens. Yeah, I think that's like the most interesting time.
Okay. And what is your approach for executing that middle school level voice in your work?
I don't know if I have a really great sort of thoughtful approach. I think I just try to explore those questions as like honestly as possible. I never actually write intentionally through a middle school lens, which is, I don't know what that says about me now, because everyone always says that this like middle school voice is so authentic, but Abbie's voice is very similar to my current voice, so I don't really know what that says about me. But I'm glad that those that like the voice that Abbie has and the voice that I have really resonates with kids, because I think that kids can really tell when you're sort of trying to talk down to them. I think kids are really intuitive and they're really smart. So I never really think about I never really focus too much on trying to cater my voice to my audience. I more just want to be as authentic and as like real as possible. And so I think it's great that that is something that resonates with kids.
What are there any memorable comments and feedback that you've gotten from children about Frazzled?
Yeah, I think that the most like touching comments are probably the ones that have to do with like representation or diversity. And I mean, kids don't say it that way, but I think that when children talk about seeing themselves in Abbie, I think that really means a lot to me, because I definitely didn't have that growing up. I mean, I had like very few Asian American characters, and there were definitely not a lot of characters of color growing up. And so anytime that kids are able to identify that, even if they're not necessarily picking up on that, they're like, this is me, Abbie is me, I think that really like touches my heart.
Do you prefer being an author or illustrating?
Oh man, I think it's hard because I think that the two come so naturally together for me, and it's hard to separate them. But ultimately, I think I prefer illustrating, just because there's a point when I'm illustrating where I can sort of tune out everything, and it feels very relaxing to me. It feels very calming and like zen, like almost like Zen moment. Whereas when I'm writing, I think it's very, I never really have those long sustained moments of, I'm very in my head. I'm very thoughtful about how the words go together. So it feels like a bit more torturous to write, just because I'm like, my brain is constantly moving. And I think with illustrating, there's a point in time when after you figured out what you want to draw and what you kind of want it to look like, where it feels like you're just figuring out. It feels a little more, calming. So I think I prefer illustrating, but it's hard to separate them because they kind of come together for me.
What tips do you have? What is your advice for authors and illustrators?
Ooh, my advice, I think the advice that I have gotten that I always try and I always need to like remind myself is to not discredit your creative work. I think that one thing that I often do is I will dismiss something that I create before people even have any comments to say about it. Like I will, even when we talk about like doodling, I totally dismissed it as not being creative. I didn't think of any of the story. Like I grew up writing fan fiction, and I thought, oh, that's not writing. It's not really writing, but it is. And all of these things that people do that are expression of creativity, I think it's very easy to dismiss those things as like flippant or silly, especially when they don't fit like a certain mold. I think when people think of writers or they think of artists, they have a very specific and very narrow view of what that looks like. And for me, I think what's most important is not dismissing any creativity and understanding that, you know, all the things that you are doing that are creative, whether or not they are good or bad or whatever, I think that there's value in creating. And so for me, always like keeping that in mind and not trying to, like discredit myself before I create is a good way of just pushing myself to keep going, I guess.
That's amazing advice. Like, I gotta say so myself.
Yeah, it's hard though. It's really hard because I feel like it's very hard to follow because it's very, very easy to just pretend like the things that you're doing are not valuable. When actually, like, even if I think about my own personal journey, when I look at my planners, I started off, like I told you, with stick figures. And so the first few iterations of my planner were just these stick figures. And over the years, when you look at this, like that whole stack of planners that I have, you can see how my style evolved and changed and grew to what it is now. But without doing those things, I would have never got to the point where I am. But so it's kind of nuts to think about how we evolve and how we grow as creators. And if you continue to dismiss your work, or you continue to feel like it's not important, or there's no point in doing it, I feel like that's what usually stops people from actually improving or growing or changing at all. So definitely worth not doing that.
So yeah, you've touched on creatives being dismissive with their creations. Do you think that people are ever dismissive when it comes to reading taste?
Yeah, absolutely. I think
you did mention fan fiction, by the way.
Yes, I did mention fan fiction. So I grew up writing fan fiction because, and in some ways, I think that it's funny because when I think about the Quarantine Diaries, I would never have written that normally in the Frazzled universe. Like it's very, it's not at all the direction I would have gone if I had written fourth book or fifth book or whatever. But in some ways, I think of the Quarantine Diaries as a fan fiction that I wrote about my own book series. And I love this idea of being able to expand on worlds that exist and expand on characters that exist. And it actually really helped me improve and grow to love storytelling and writing. But so I think that there really isn't any sort of creative thing that you can do that isn't worthwhile or that isn't kind of pushing you to get better. Because when you think about it, like the only way to improve is to just do it. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of sort of different books and different ways of creating that are easily dismissed. I think people really dismiss like comics a lot. I think people dismiss stick figures a lot, to be honest. And I think that is a really narrow understanding of what storytelling is and what creativity is. I think you can tell a great story with very little illustration, or you can tell a really great story with very few words. So it's more about the story than I think the way that it's presented. I think some people are really too limited in their scope of what books look like.
And how are people responding to this new presentation of Abbie Wu, where she's like even more accessible with her Quarantine Diary?
Yeah, I'm actually really pleasantly surprised because at some point I wasn't sure if anyone would be interested in reading it. I really wasn't sure what the response would be, but it's been really encouraging to see people reacting to it and feeling connected to it. And it does feel like I did it in a slightly selfish way because I really needed to process what was going on. I really needed to process the feelings that I was feeling being in quarantine. But it's nice to hear that other people are also resonating with it, and that other people are also finding like kind of an escape through humor and through this like character of Abbie Wu and her family.
And where are you still, would you say, in the same place emotionally that you were during the start in the earlier days of the pandemic, or has it gotten any better for you?
Yeah, I think, you know, it's funny because I think it comes and goes in waves. I think it's different because we're all kind of getting used to this new way of living, and none of us have been in this kind of situation before. So I'm definitely not at the place where I was at the very beginning. And I think a lot of that does have to do with just, for me at least, like creating this comic and getting out those feelings. So I haven't like shared it yet, but there's one where I really wanted to do an entry about like feeling like you were sure that you had coronavirus. And there were definitely moments that I was positive that I had it, despite the fact that I had not left my apartment for weeks. And I was so certain. And it was just like that sort of like paranoid uncertainty and being in your own head. And I think that was actually a really challenging entry to do, because it's hard to get out that feeling of anxiety and kind of fear, especially when it's all mental, it's all in your head. It's really hard to communicate that to other people in a way that they can relate to. I like feel like that's very challenging. And so I hope that I did it. We'll see what people think. But I definitely think that writing, like kind of using Abbie to communicate that, using Abbie as a kind of outlet to get out those feelings, helped me kind of process them, help me realize just that it was kind of, it's all that, so much of it was happening in my head, and so much of it was just something that you have to go through and figure out how to deal with.
It's definitely funny too, like Abbie Wu's journey, like with her, you know, the comic book version, her initially thinking that distance learning is going to be fun, but in fact she realizes she's starting to feel like it's even worse, you know. So but yeah, what can you tell us about at this moment, at current, the newest episode is Middle School Online, a new virtual level of weird, and what is your goal with each new entry that you post?
Yeah, I think my goals are not so lofty. I think for me, my goals are really come down to what is something that I have felt in quarantine that I want to tackle. And so like the one about the middle school going online, I think that is something that I'm not a middle school student. I do not have those experiences, but we have been having a lot of like Zoom calls, a lot of like online things, like interactions with friends, and even in like a professional way. And I just think that when I thought about what it was like for a middle school student to kind of navigate this realm, I just thought about it being really weird. Obviously, as an adult, there are really different, we have really different experiences, and I'm sure teachers are having a lot of different experiences, but as a kid, I just kept relating it to how I felt like when I was a kid, and I would see my teachers at the grocery store, and I would hide because it was so mortifying, the idea of seeing your teacher outside of school, because in my mind, teachers did not exist outside of school. Like, how could they? They belonged to the school. And so the thought of them not being in school was really strange. And I can't imagine how kids are feeling now that they're seeing not only their teachers, but their friends. They're seeing like pretty much everything. And I just can't help but think how strange that is. And so I really wanted to capture that sort of feeling.
You really did. You captured that.
Yeah, and I want to be respectful of the fact that obviously we're all kind of stuck in this place and in this strange bubble of like everyone's in screens. But yeah, I also talked to my nephew, who doesn't give much away, but he was like, yeah, it's weird. It's really weird. But one comment that I thought was really funny that he told me was he was like, yeah, but I can sleep in now and I don't have to change. And I just thought that was so funny that like he's in middle school, or he was, and he's just like, yeah, I don't have to change out of my pajamas. And so, yeah, I just love that kids have such a different perspective on things, but at the same time, they're really smart and they really are attuned to what's happening. And so it was challenging, but it's always interesting kind of exploring what I think a middle school student would be going through in this time, what Abbie would be going through. Because obviously, like, I am living by myself, so that's a really different quarantine experience than someone who's living with their family, and especially a kid who's living with their family. So it's been kind of fun to imagine what it would be like if I had to be in that situation, and I guess what Abbie's going through in her kind of family unit.
What's your process, Booki, for getting each entry up? Are they like written in advance? Do you do maybe 2 in advance, or is it more gradual?
I also don't have a really strong process for that. I've just been like making them just so that I don't get behind, and hopefully I can keep up. I'm just kind of winging it, to be honest. I've never written a webcomic before, so this is all kind of a really spur of the moment experiment. And so once I decided that I really thought I should release it kind of in parts as a webcomic, I just decided to just go for it and do my best to keep up with the entries. So I have a few more that I've already done that will be for the next few weeks, but I'm just pushing forward, and hopefully we'll be able to keep up with the weeks as they go along. But yeah, I don't really have too much of a plan. I have a like vague sort of loose idea of where I want to take the whole narrative, because obviously I don't want it to just go on forever and ever. Because hopefully, like quarantine, hopefully it will end at some point. But it like, if I just have a feeling that I want to write about, then I'll just do a diary entry about it. And so it's very loose, and there's a little bit of freedom in that, which I kind of like.
You mentioned that Frazzled is over. I mean, so okay, 2 questions. How did you know when it was over? Like, how does an author know when it's over? And was this something that you told your readers? And what is it like when a series has ended, when you're also picking up new readers, you know, and you're always going to get new readers to your work?
Yeah, I think that is that's a hard part. So when Frazzled was like once we started the series, we knew that it was going to be 3 books. And I think that it kind of felt like when I wrote it, I wasn't sure if I wanted to give it, like, I wasn't sure how to end it. And in some ways, I think that with the 3rd book and the way that it ends, it's an ending, but it's not like a final sort of like, and now this is done. And so I think that I knew that it was, I knew I wanted to kind of leave it open, because I don't think that there won't be any other Frazzled books, but I really like the idea of readers kind of in their minds being able to envision and see how things could continue further. Like I told you, I'm a big fan of like fan fiction from my youth, and I kind of love this idea of kids and people taking the story and taking it in directions that I wouldn't have necessarily taken it as an author. And so, yeah, for me, I just knew Frazzled was ending because we had envisioned it as 3 books. And so the thought of like, yeah, I mean, so it's like a bittersweet sort of thing where the series ends and you have to let it go and let it free. But in some ways, I think it's kind of nice to allow like new readers to have the series as like a foundational thing and envision what they think it could, where it could go from there.
Okay, that makes it better then. That makes it a bit better you saying it like that.
Yeah, and it's kind of nice because I do have like I can just like tell more Frazzled stories on my own if I want, and I think that that's kind of the beauty of the internet and being able to connect with readers that way, in some ways like almost directly with the like parents and teachers that have read Frazzled. I think wasn't sure if I would ever do that, like if I would ever like be able to write about these characters again, and I kind of miss them. So this kind of side project has been a nice way of continuing the series, but kind of on my own terms and in my own timeline. Yeah, it's been exciting.
Yeah. Do you think that this is a medium that a lot of authors could benefit from, especially because it's releasing on your own terms and everything, and it's a faster process too? What are your thoughts on this kind of mode?
Yeah, I mean, I like it. I like it as like a supplement to like book series, and I think that it's interesting because I don't know. I've never really tried doing it in this way, and I wasn't sure if I would, but it's been fun to explore. Who knows? Maybe other authors will do the same.
And what is next for you, Booki?
For me, I've got to come up with something new, which is always like the weird, confusing, but also exciting part is that there's a lot of kind of stories out there and stories that I like might consider telling, but I just gotta figure out where my next story is, I guess. So while it won't be with Abbie Wu, hopefully people will still really resonate with it. Hopefully I'll still be able to do the same thing where I'm like channeling all my feelings into books.
Booki Vivat, everyone. Booki, thank you so much for talking to So Booking Cool today. I really enjoyed you. It was awesome getting to know you, and
This is so fun.
I'm so glad that you enjoyed it. And you know, I love what you're doing, like your side project and everything. It's just great that you're keeping it going, and that's so inspiring as well. Like I have to say.
Yeah, this is so much fun talking to you about this. I haven't talked about this project before, so it was really exciting to kind of revisit Frazzled in a new way and also talk to you about it.
That's so awesome. You know, how can people, you know, learn more about Frazzled, get it, and access Abbie Wu's Quarantine Diary, keep up with you, stay connected and updated, all of it?
So I have my website, which is bookivivat.com. And then also I usually post a lot on Instagram. That's kind of mostly where I live. And then you can also check out my the Quarantine Diary series at bookivivat.substack.com. But all of those things, I think if you just go to my website, you can find ways to get there.
And the entries from the Quarantine Diary, you know, of Abbie Wu, they're all up there, but new entries come out every Monday, right?
Yes. And so if you subscribe to the newsletter, then you'll get it in your inbox every Monday when I update.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah. All right. Is there any final words that you'd like to say, Booki?
I just want to say, stay safe, and you know, we're in this together, and read Frazzled.
Yes, guys, definitely check out Frazzled. Great messages. And thank you to all the listeners. Until next time, So Booking Cool.